Okay, so we're still in the ancient period. And today we will talk about, like I said, several key figures. One of them is Heraclitus. Heraclitus, this is his approximate, very approximate years of life, 540 BC until 480 BC. In terms of like exact years, it's always complicated when you go that far back. There's different sources which tell us different things about how old they were at a certain point, and then you try to kind of extrapolate it. So even different books may give you different birthday periods of life for these figures. But approximately he lived around that time. Was born around 540 BC and lived for about 60 years. He was contemporary roughly with Xenophonus. Remember Xenophonus we mentioned in the end of last class, Pythagoras, who we'll talk about today, and Heraclitus of Miletus. He was also from Ephesus, which is another city in Ionia. We talked about Ionia last time. This time we will move to a different part of Greek world. However, Ionia still will be important as an influence. And Heraclitus is kind of transitionary figure here. Now as to his biography, there are many stories. Most of them are most likely made up. So if you read books about Heraclitus, you will see those stories with immediately the caveat that we don't know how reliable any of it is, and given the length of time, they're probably made up. So it doesn't make much sense to repeat all of them, but just a few important points. He does seem to be from a very wealthy noble family. He could have even become a king. He could have inherited kinships. He decided not to, resigned in favor of his brother. Now that seems like one of the most reliable bits of information about Heraclitus. Remember last time I was saying that mythos and logos are two words with very similar meaning. But mythos is more of a story, whereas logos has many meanings. And it's mainly the story which has rational content in it. So that's one of the words we'll talk about today a lot more, because it is kind of a key word to understand the Greeks, logos. And it influenced a lot of philosophy after the Greeks. Okay, so this is the quote. This logos holds always, but humans always prove unable to understand it, both before hearing it and when they have first heard it. For although all things come to be or happen in accordance with this logos, humans are like inexperienced when they experience such words and deeds as I set out, distinguishing each in accordance with its nature and saying how it is. But other people fail to notice what they do when they awake, just as they forget when they do when they are asleep.
While you're asleep.
Exactly. So logos and logic are connected. Logic comes from Greek word logike, which is to speak, and logos is the kind of a speech or account, although it has also several other meanings. Logos also means definition of a word. Logos also means rational account of something when somebody asks you to explain it, and you explain it, so you give in the logos, right? So there is indeed, seems like there is certain rule about the way world works, which is the laws of logic and mathematics. And if you understand these rules, you can get better control of the world, right? This is exactly what we are doing today. The Greeks already started understanding that, and this is kind of a first glimpse of that. So if you kind of extract it from the reality, if you approach reality differently than you approach your dreams, and try to figure out what rules are there, then you'll be able to actually control it and turn it towards your benefit. So that's kind of an idea. This is the beginning of his book. There was the whole book he has written, Peripusis on nature. It was called. It survived for more than 1,000 years. Unfortunately, all the copies, and they were handwritten copies, right? At the time, they would just, the philosopher would write something, then there would be several scribes who would copy it, They would create maybe 100 copies. I don't think they would do more than that because it was expensive and tedious process. Sometimes they may not even make that much. Then, of course, a couple of 100 years later, some of them are lost, destroyed. There are more copies made. They lost, destroyed, more copies made. So after about 1,000 years, and note that this is 2,500 years ago, roughly. After 1,000 years or 1,500 years, there's no more copies, all gone. And people are not as careful about preserving stuff back then as they are now. Right now, we have some important copies which are kept in libraries under controlled conditions in special environment. Well, obviously, they did not have controlled condition in special environment. They would just pile them somewhere. Even if they had some libraries, that would be just, some sort of a room where they would pile a bunch of those. And periodically, there'd be fires and natural disasters. So eventually, they were all lost. But some people read them and wrote about them, and this is what we call testimonia. There's this fragments, like this is a fragment, one of the fragments, and the other ones they're all fragments. They are retold by these people. These people sometimes would copy part of the original text in their own book. And these books survived and came to us. Mainly, we're talking about early Christianity period. The early Christians in the 2nd century, 3rd century, our time, they had access to those original materials, and they wrote a lot. And Christian material preserved a little bit better. Why? Because, well, Christianity is still very important today for people. So whatever was written by those fathers of the church and so on was better preserved. And people like Heraclitus, they looked at, it's interesting, but what are these Greeks? We don't care about them that much, right? So they didn't care as much about preserving those works, and majority of them, for this reason, are completely lost today. So this is the beginning of the book. The book was much longer. We don't know what else was in this book, but there are several other interesting fragments. Now let's take a look at actually this, and this is in Greek, but I needed to put it in Greek because this is kind of an interesting quote, and it will help us to understand both of these words in more of a context, arche and logos. If you look at the first sentence there, it says, an arche hen ho logos. So it has both of the words, right? It has the word arche, with an English spelling, or Latin rather, and logos. And then it goes on and says, kai ho logos pros ton tion, kai theos he ho logos. If I translate the first line, you would probably, at least some of you, would understand where it comes from. They translate it here as at the beginning. They go, at the beginning, there was word. So what's the next line? Does anybody know? And the word was with God. And ho logos te pros ton tion. Theos is God in Greek. And the word was God. That's the way it is translated in the Bible. But if you understand Greek, you immediately see problems with this translation. They translate arche as the beginning. Is it just the beginning? No. It actually could mean underlying reality, what everything is made of, which is the English word beginning does not represent in any way. And logos, is that word? Is that all it means? No. It could also mean the rational account, the reason behind everything. So another translation of the same sentence could be at the foundation of everything there was reason, and the reason was with God. Now, for this reason, if you actually want to understand, and this is New Testament part of the Bible, if you really want to understand it, you also need to learn Greek. It's written in the Koine Greek. Koine Greek is kind of a slightly simplified version because it's been written 500 years after Heraclitus and 400 years after Plato. So in Greek language also slightly changed. More people were speaking Greek at the time. It became more common, and so more common version kind of simplified some of the fine-tuning. But it is still Greek. It is still very, very close to the way Plato, Aristotle, Heraclitus were speaking. Plus, there were different dialects at the time too. Why is New Testament written in Greek? Did you even know it was written in Greek? It is written in Greek. Old Testament is written in Hebrew, because Old Testament is the part of Jewish religion. New Testament was written in Greek. Why? What language, well, at least as far as we know, Christ spoke? Aramaic. But the language of educated people at the time was Greek. And the scribes who were writing the New Testament wrote it in Greek because that was educated standard at the time. It's like English today, right? Even if you live in Germany, you may want to write your professional paper in English because more people will understand it. It's more common. It is more of a language of academia. So in a similar way, the Greek was at the time language of educated people, and so they have written it in Greek language. And many people who are interested in the New Testament and want to learn more about it learn Greek just because that way you again get better grasp of all these words which in English are stripped of most of its meaning. They are simplified so that people could understand it. Bible was actually translated into Latin, and for many centuries you needed to know Latin to read the Bible, as we will be talking about later in class, even though it's not written in Latin originally. But then during the Reformation, there was this movement to make Bible more approachable for majority of people so that simple people could understand it too. Not only the educated people like the priests who learned Latin and were able to read it. Anyway, so that's from John 1:1. That is part of the New Testament in the Bible. And the Christianity, the early Christianity, was heavily influenced by the Greeks. The Greeks had a tremendous influence on it. Some fathers of the church rejected the Greek philosophy influence, but some embraced it. And in fact, some of the most important ones we'll talk about later in the class did embrace the teachings of Plato and then teachings of Aristotle. So they are at the foundation of a religious understanding of the world too. So logos is, like I said, it's a complicated word. It could mean account, reason. Some books give like up to 50 different English words to translate it. So it is not an easy word to understand. But some other quotes from Heraclitus also refer to it. He's saying, listening not to me, but to the Logos, it is wise to agree that all things are one. This is another one of his famous theories. And that was in the reading too. Some of this testimonia did kind of talk about all things being one. What does it mean? He mentions at one point, if you noticed, different oppositions. And he says those oppositions really are not oppositions at all. Everything is one thing. But they are essential part of reality. Because oppositions is what makes the world. So it's an interesting theory. Later on, some philosophers will pick it up. And he talks quite a bit about change. It's one of the most famous parts, and that actually is what influenced Plato. Here's some of the ideas Heraclitus was transmitting. You cannot step into the same river twice. What does he mean here? Can you step into the same river twice? Yeah.
Maybe he means that being entity.
Exactly. We call it Colorado River, right? We have it right here. But the water is always different. So how is it Colorado River? Isn't it like constantly a different kind of river? What makes it specifically Colorado River? Just the banks? But then isn't the water the essence of the river? Yeah.
It's always in Colorado. The water's running through the same place.
Okay, but well, I guess if you connect the name, but not all rivers are like that, right? Some rivers have no connection, their names have no connection to the areas where they are. Okay, but remember the question of change was very important and interesting for them too. And it's not just about the river. The sun is new every day. Well, that is something we obviously would disagree with today because we have better information on the subject. But if you didn't have all this scientific knowledge, doesn't it seem to make sense that there's a new sun every day? Because it like goes down completely. There's nothing left. And then next morning, something similar comes up. But is it the same sun or is it not? Changing, it is a trust. That's another one of his sayings. Even the posset, and that's like the type of a drink they had, separates if it's not been stirred. Well, you know types of drinks we have today too, which have to be stirred, otherwise it's like separates. All things are in exchange for fire, and fire for all things, as goods for gold and gold for goods. So he thought fire is actually arche. In other words, fire is at the foundation of everything. Everything is kind of made of fire. Not literally maybe, but at least fire is the beginning of everything, right? So that's where this dual meaning of this word kind of comes in, because he doesn't necessarily have to mean, even if he says it's an arche, doesn't necessarily have to mean that if you drill a hole in a bottle, the fire will come out. What he means is at the foundation of everything, there may have been some sort of huge fire. And fire does play an important role for him. So here's another quote. This world order, or cosmos, the Greek word is cosmos, but remember cosmos is world order, the same for all, none of the gods a man has made, but it was always and is and shall be, everlasting fire, which has been kindled in measures and extinguished in measures. Another interesting quote. What do you think he means? Well, first of all, does it seem like he thinks there is a beginning of the world? Yeah, you may think about it in this way, like fire is a type of a god in itself. And also, he does seem to suggest that the world has no beginning. The world always has been. It's just kept on going in different ways, which is possible theory. Even today, if you ask physicists, did the world have a beginning? Well, I think we mentioned last time the Big Bang Theory, right? But does Big Bang Theory tell us anything about that? Does the world actually has a beginning? Not really, because there are several related theories. One of them is like this. We know that there was a Big Bang. How do we know that? Because we measured the size of the universe, and then we measured it again, and the universe got bigger after some time. And it's constantly expanding, right? So they calculated that at some point universe was just a dot. And they also found some evidence, and at that point all the forces were one, and everything was one thing. Then explosion of some sort, which they call Big Bang, happened. The whole thing started expanding. Well, great, but there's no answer to the question, first of all, why did it happen? What caused it? Second, there's no answer to the question what happened before it. In fact, the scientists know what happened 0.0000 second after Big Bang, but not the actual Big Bang moment. And of course, they don't know what was before the Big Bang. So here's one of the theories. The whole thing is expanding now, but at some point it will expand to the point where it will start contracting. When it starts contracting, it will go back into the point. And once it is small enough, another Big Bang, it will start expanding. Then contracting, then expanding, then contract, and that will be forever. For all we know, it may have been forever. There's absolutely no reason to believe that there actually was anything before that. That could have been just a constant process. It's impossible to check whether this theory is correct, at least not with the current science, but it is one of the theories, so that is quite possible. In that case, Heraclitus is right. Of course, it's also possible that there was nothing before that, even though it's hard for a human mind to imagine that, because if there was absolutely nothing, the question becomes, How can something come out of nothing? That's a very good philosophical question. Can something come out of nothing? And the Greeks were already wondering about that. He also got a few things indeed to say about the soul. He says that the soul is in fact fire. Fire, logos, it's kind of like, you may even say the same thing for him. It directs us. And for this reason, he made the conclusion that life ends when the soul becomes wet. Well, the fire goes out when something becomes wet, so you have to keep yourself dry. The drier you are, the more alive you will be. And if you become wet, then you might die. Soul will only have afterlife if it's pure when it dies. So he did believe in afterlife, apparently, but soul has to be pure. If the soul is not pure, then no afterlife. Now his ethics, remember that's virtue and morality, is also kind of interesting. The most important goal, according to Heraclitus, is to achieve understanding of the logos. He rejects Homer completely. Already a rejection of Homer, intellectual, not bodily virtues, not inherited by birth, but attained. So you don't have to be born noble and have a good aristocratic background to truly be the best. Aristos, as they were saying. The word aristocracy comes from the Greek word aristos, which is the best. But aristocracy, even today, typically means people who have noble birth. And that is one of the things he actually rejected. Wisdom is divine. It is the best way of life. People should become closer to God by attaining wisdom, understanding logos. Logos is how everything works. Now on unity of opposites, that's another interesting part of it. So here's a couple of quotes. They do not understand how, though at variance with itself, it agrees with itself. It is a backward tuning, attunement like that of the bow and the lyre. What is opposed brings together. The finest harmony, harmonia, is composed of things at variance, and everything comes to be in accordance with strife. Very influential. Many philosophers, including Nietzsche, would love this quote. What do you think about it? What is he trying to say? Does he want things to be in balance? Like that's an interesting thing here. Yeah.
And progresses.
Yeah, that's a completely different point of view from what we discussed last time with Anaximander. He actually thinks that conflict is a good thing. Conflict is necessary. This is what drives everything. And he gives an example of bow and the lyre. So the way bow works, you need to have tension, right? That's the only way you will be able to show an arrow. If there is no tension, if your string breaks, it's no longer a bow, it's just a stick. Same thing with a lyre. If you want to have music, the strings have to be under tension. So this tension, the strife, is what makes things just, I mean. If you talk about justice, it is strife, according to him. And this is some of the most controversial and fiery quotes. To God all things are beautiful and good and just, but humans have supposed some unjust and some just. War is the father of all and king of all, and some he knows as gods, others as humans. Some he makes slaves, others free. It is necessary to know that war is common, justice is strife, and that all things happen in accordance with strife and necessity. For fire will advance and judge and convict all things. So what do you think about that? War is the father of all and the king of all. He thinks war is actually a good thing. The strife, the war, is what makes some people gods and others humans. Some people slaves and others free. Not just conservation. Like if you look at nature, are animals kind to each other? No. It's a wild world. If somebody is weak, they'll eat him or her, whatever it is. And that's the way things are supposed to be, according to Heraclitus. He thinks that this battle is essential part of life. And if you don't have this battle, you don't have life. So as a result of that, some people will become slaves and other people will become free because they deserve it. Because that is justice. Justice, according to him, is the best should be the best. They should get the best. Not the noble birth best, but the people who are most capable, right? The ones who win in battle. And the ones who don't, well, too bad. That's how reality is. So that's, like I said, somewhat controversial, but very different outlook. And it is also influential. What do you guys think justice is? Do you agree with Anaximander that it is equalizing everything? Or do you think, the way Heraclitus holds it, that it actually is the strongest, the most capable should have more than the weakest? Yeah. Well, if you look at politics today, this is exactly the disagreement we have in politics. Because there are politicians who actually say, like, people who work harder should have more. They should be billionaires. And there are other politicians who say, no, actually, we should equalize it. There shouldn't be such a wide divide, at least. They not necessarily go down to we should equally divide everything. That may be not very popular, although there are still some people who believe that too. But politicians, at least, mostly just talk about making it more equal, like not allowing a very huge variation. When one person is sleeping on the street, has nothing, and another person is a billionaire, has like 15 homes, he only sleeps in one of them, the rest is just empty while they are traveling the world. So that's a disagreement. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Should we allow that, and to what degree? Goes back all the way to ancient Greece and still with us today. So again, what do you think? Yeah, that's exactly like in ethics we talk more about it, equality of opportunity or equality of outcome. These are two different things, right? Just as an example, in the Olympic Games, everybody starts from the same position, right? If you have runners, and then some of them are faster, so they get there faster and they get gold medal, and some of them are not. That's equality of opportunity. So everybody should have the same starting position. But you can go further and say, no, 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 like everybody should actually get there at the same time. So that's the equality of outcome. Then, like, you don't care whether somebody is working harder. Everybody should have the same share of the goods. Everybody has the same right to everything. And that's like a different type of equality. So when people talk about equality, which one do they actually mean? It's not the same thing. They are related, obviously. Because, yeah, of course, if you start earlier, you can get there much faster. And in normal life, you see people who are like children of multimillionaires, billionaires. Of course, they are born into privilege. They immediately get the best education. They live up in a safe neighborhood with all their friends later become CEOs of the companies and presidents of the banks. So who do they become? CEOs of the companies and presidents of the banks. And you look at another person and they were born in a ghetto. Their parents are drug addicts and their friends are all criminals. So who do you think they will become? How much does it take of a person? Like, how much can you even ask a child of like 10, 12, 15 years old to make good choices in life under these circumstances? Can you really judge them for joining a gang? Like, how old are you when you actually start making decisions rationally and responsibly? By the time you are doing that, all the decisions already made for you by your parents and your friends and other people around you. And then you end up in jail with some sort of drug conviction, and that's it. Your life is over. You're not going to become CEO after that. That's not going to happen. If you work very hard after that, maybe you will get a job in McDonald's and be making decent living. That's the best you can hope for. Otherwise, it's a life of crime. One crime after another. Because, yeah, so that is an important part of it. And of course, it's all related. And then it's easy when your daddy loaned you $1 million to start your own business. You went bankrupt and he loaned you more money. And then you become successful billionaire compared to somebody whose daddy could only loan them a bottle of whiskey. So that, of course, is two different people, two different situations. Anyway, so now we are switching to, like I said, different part of Greek world, Elea, Eleatics. That's how this group of philosophers is known. They lived around, this is southern Italy and Sicily. Today it is Italy. Obviously, back then it was not Italy. Rome is here. It is kind of southern part of it. Roman kingdom didn't really, like Roman Empire, didn't really become as big and powerful yet, because we're talking 500 BC. So at that point, Greeks were more advanced, you may say, as a civilization. And they lived all around this area. But the philosophy they had was very different. And there are several key figures here. One of them is Pythagoras. You probably heard about him, at least something. What is he famous for? The theorem, Pythagorean theorem, which as far as historians today are more or less agreeing on, has nothing to do with Pythagoras whatsoever. Pythagoras was an interesting figure. He was mystic. He was a philosopher in a sense. He did have an influence on philosophy, but mainly he was what you may call today a cult leader. Pythagoreans were like a cult. They were a group which had its own rules. There are some interesting stories about that. One of them is that to join this cult, you needed to prove that you can keep secrets, because their entire teaching, which was coming from Pythagoras, was secret. So how did they test people? You have to be silent for, I think it was 7 years. Not saying a word to anybody. If you can do that, they'll take you as their member. If you cannot do that, too bad. So how strict it was, we don't know, but that's one of the stories. He himself was born in Ionia, in that part of the world which we talked about last time, which is today Turkey. But he did immigrate to Croton. This is Croton right here on the bottom of Italian shoe. He immigrated there around 530 BC, so when he was like 40 years old or something, and started this very influential movement of Pythagoreans. One of the problems to learn anything about Pythagoras is, according to Pythagoreans, everything they invented, his followers, was attributed to him. He was like a godlike figure. So the teaching of Pythagoreans, who actually were in existence for about 100 years at least, probably more than 100 years, all of their teachings were attributed to him. Which one of them is actually his contribution? Hard to say. Some of the things we can probably figure out, but we're still not sure even about that. Around 500 BC, he was driven away from this area. Local people did not like his sect being positioned near a city. They did not like his influence. There are stories that one of the aristocrats wanted to join and was rejected, so they got mad at them and they drive them away. He left around 500 BC, and shortly after that he died. But Pythagoreans remained. So what are the main beliefs they had? There are several beliefs which are key and very influential too, like I said, on Plato. Yeah?
The soul is immortal.
Yeah, the soul is immortal. That's one of the things. But they believed in transmigration of the soul. Transmigration means that the soul moves from one animal to the other, not even just human. So when you die, you can become a dog. Yeah, it's a reincarnation, but not as a human being. You could become literally anything, including a cockroach. Another influential theory, he had eternal return of the same, meaning that the story of the universe repeats over and over again. Everything which is happening today, at some point will happen again. And then again, and again. We'll be still in this classroom multiple number of times, and I'll be telling you this exact same thing. Why did they believe that? Well, one of the theories that if the world is eternal, there's only so many combinations the world can take, and at some point it will run out of combinations, so everything will have to repeat itself. Nietzsche will actually pick up this theory later on. an interrelation of living creatures, which kind of comes from transmigration, right? Because if the Greek words we use for this, metempsychosis. Psychosis is actually psycho, psyche, as they called it, is a soul in Greek. So metempsychosis means transmigration of the soul. Here's the quote from Porphyry, which is another person who lived already several hundred years later, but he had some access to the original Pythagorean documents. Here's what he says. First, he, meaning Pythagoras, declares that the soul is immortal. Then, that it changes into other kinds of animals. In addition, that things that happen recur at certain intervals, nothing is absolutely new, and that all things that come to be alive must be through akin. Well, that makes sense, right? If you, after you die, can become a cat. Well, when you meet a cat, do you know who it was before? Maybe it was your grandpa. And literally they were saying things like this. You never know. If your friend died, he can become a dog. And then you meet a dog, so you better treat it well. It could be your friend. Pythagoras seemed to have been the first to introduce these opinions into Greece. They were kind of borrowed from some other people, but Pythagoras really kind of reintegrated it into Greek philosophy. After his death, they split into two groups. One of them was known as akusimatikoi, and the other one mathematikoi. And the word mathematikoi immediately tells you what they kind of were about. So people who proved the Pythagorean theorem were probably some of the mathematikoi, not the Pythagoras himself. He probably was already dead at that time. Akusma is like an oral saying or password. So that is something which one group of them believed. They were more religious conservative. They wanted to preserve the teachings of Pythagoras exactly as they were. But mathematically were more interesting. And one of the things which they were really fascinated with, as their name suggests, is numbers. They thought the number is actually arche, everything made of numbers. Like, they were very literal about it. They thought 10 is the perfect number, and then a human being has a number, and animals have numbers, and everything has numbers. They also discovered that there is close connection between numbers and music. You can describe music as a ratios. So for this reason, they considered numbers to be magical. 10, they thought, was a magical number because it kind of, like, it has, first of all, it has 1, which is a dot, right? 1 dot is 1, a point, you may say. If you take 2 points and connect them, that is a line. If you take 3 points and connect them, that is a triangle. And if you take 4 points and connect them, you can build like a pyramid. And then if you put these numbers like 1, 2, 3, and 4 in a triangle like this, how many dots do you have? 10. So that's one of the things which fascinated them. Number 10 is a kind of representation of a dot, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, 4-dimensional reality. So that is interesting teaching, and at the time it seemed crazy. Some philosophers, some people were saying, how can everything be made of numbers? Well, what do we think today? Does it make a little bit more sense today? I mean, for example, they couldn't understand indeed how a picture can be consisting of numbers. Well, do pictures consist of numbers? The view of reality. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Computers only work on numbers. In fact, the computer operates with just 2 numbers. If you know anything about computer programming, 0 and 1, that's all. There's a long, long string of 0 and 1s. Enormous number of them. Very quickly the processor processes them, and you get pictures and music and even intellect now. It can, AI, it can operate like a human mind. All it has is zeros and ones, nothing else. So that actually seemed to make more sense to us today than it did back then, but they are the ones who came up with it. So now Parmenides. Parmenides was also very interesting. He is hard to understand. Parmenides did write some work, and we actually have a huge chunk of his book, which is very weird. He radically transformed now the way people thought about cosmology. He did have an enormous influence. He disagreed with, in particular, Heraclitus. He disagreed with some other ones. But he was very, very logical. He used deductive argumentation and deductive logic and thought that that is a better way to learn reality than observation. Your eyes can lie to you. Your ears can lie to you. But logic cannot lie. And that is an interesting split which will start to happen at this time. So he applied pure logic, and this is what he kind of discovered. So anything we can think of or speak about either exists or doesn't exist. That seems to be logically clear, right? Anything that doesn't exist is nothing. We cannot think or speak about nothing. So we cannot think or speak about what doesn't exist. Therefore, and this is the conclusion, kind of reaches here, anything we can think or speak about exists. Seems to be a weird conclusion, isn't it? What do you think? Yeah. Exactly. Does the unicorn exist? Yeah.
I think he's just
You can think about it one way, yeah. You can also think about it this way. So what is exactly unicorn?
A horse with a horn on its head?
A horse with a horn. Do horses exist?
Yes.
Do horns exist? Yeah. So you're just putting it together in the wrong way, but that you're talking about existing things. You're not talking about something. Try to imagine something which doesn't exist, like you've never experienced it. It's impossible. If you look at the way people like draw devil and so on, what are they using? The tail, the horns, everything they saw in the animals. Can you really draw a devil which nobody has ever seen? No. What would it look like? You have to use some sort of imagery from what you've seen. So that's like one way to think about it. And he made another amazing kind of conclusion from that, that change is an illusion. Reality is actually unchanging. This is several conclusions which can be drawn from his work. One of them is that being, or what is ungenerated and unperishable. It seemed common sense to him, because how can something come out of nothing? How can you generate something of nothing? So everything always existed. Okay, being is indivisible and all alike. Now that is a little bit harder to understand, but think about it. If you have a chunk of like being, how can you split it? What exactly would you split it with? Non-being? There has to be a chunk of being. Being is without beginning or end, which is connected to the first one. Being is now, was not, and will not be. What does he mean here? Where is the past? Only the present exists. Like, where is the past? Can you like point at it? How about the future? Where exactly is the future? By the time future is here, it is now. But until it is now, where is it? It's nowhere. It doesn't exist. Neither the past nor the future exist. Only now exists. Then, this is the most strange conclusion he draws. Being is unchangeless, motionless, and unique. So it is one thing which doesn't change at all. He didn't believe there is any change. Change is just an illusion. We think things are changing. But if there is no past and no future, and only now, how can anything change? Now, that also is connected to physics. And so the conclusion from this is that being is one thing, and it doesn't change. Change is an illusion. Okay. Who is that? Me?
Yeah, you're younger.
Okay. Are you sure? Is it me? That's an interesting question, is it? Yeah, it actually is a picture of me many years ago. But the question here is it still me today? Is that the same person? Do we remain the same person throughout our life? Now, I'm much older than you guys. So for me, it is easier to understand. But even you kind of can think about yourself 5, 10 years ago. Is that the same person? Like on one hand, it seems like, yeah, the same name, right? Same parents. But is it the same person? What does it make you the same person? Especially if a lot of time passed. So many things changed. Your opinions about almost everything changed. Your knowledge of the world changed. Your attitude towards the world changed. Is that even the same person now? Is it fair? Like, I think in biology they tell us that the human body completely changes in about 7 years. Every single atom in the human body is replaced. So how is it the same person? It's just like with the river, right? Everything changed, so is it the same river? The water is completely different, but at least river is in the same place. But humans, they move around. So that's the million-dollar question here. Is change an illusion? Are we actually undergoing some sort of change? And if we do, then there wouldn't really be us. So in some sense, the only me is the one which is right here in front of you at this moment. There's no me 20 years ago. There was some other guy. Yeah. That's the question, right? Or the house. Like suppose there is a house, and then they change the roof, and then they changed the walls, and then they changed the foundation, and they literally changed everything, and it's even different design now. Is it the same house?
Maybe only in our heads. It's the same house.
But the same thing happens with humans. Yeah.
I think
Yeah, so, but from that point of view, it's a different house. It's just you like to think of it as being the same. And similarly with human beings, like we like to think of ourselves being the same person, but are we really? So, according to Parmenides, change is an illusion. There's really no change. Yeah. It's a dangerous road to pin it to DNA, because that way you kind of shedding yourself all the time, like leaving traces of yourself, so that's yourself on the table. Is it really? Yeah. Okay, but that's also a dangerous road, because suppose you lost your memory. So is it still you? Or people who are becoming insane, they don't even know who they are. Yet we think of them as the same person. How is it the same person now? Is it the same person? Yeah, that is an arguable kind of point. Some people can say it is the same, some people not, because it's hard to point what exactly makes it the same, other than us calling it. Yeah, we can call it, I don't know, the house of John, and think of it as house of John, whatever. Or with the boats, like they have specific name. But if everything changed, is it even the same boat? In related question, suppose you can create an exact copy of you. Like DNA, memories, everything is exactly the same. Can you now kill yourself because that's you? It seems like not that there's something more to it. Even if you have exact copy of you, that's not exactly you. You are still you, and that is still a copy. Yeah.
Are we a different person every day then?
It could be. Like there is one interesting theory about like when you wake up in the morning. We still have like a few minutes. Don't rush yet. There's still some interesting stuff. So when you wake up in the morning, suppose that you never existed before. The entire life is just a memory superimposed on your brain. And you only live for one day. And when you die, your life ended. Next morning, you wake up as a completely different person, but you have completely different set of memories, so you think you are this other person. That could be happening. How would you ever know? Anyway, reason versus the senses. This will be a big theme throughout this course, because on one hand, if you go with your reason, you seem to achieve great results. But sometimes your reason tells you things like what it was telling Parmenides, which seems very strange. At the same time, if you just go this way and not trust your senses, you may have problems in real life. And some philosophers are known for being a little bit negligent of dangers of daily life just because they thought so much about the stars and everything, but they didn't think about what is happening. The student of Parmenides, Zeno of Elea, is more famous because he was trying to popularize the teachings of his teacher, and he wrote several books, and he actually, you may have heard about Zeno's paradoxes. Have anybody heard about Zeno's paradoxes? They are meant to illustrate the points of his teacher. So some of them are quite interesting. Achilles and tortoise. Here is the story. It's a huge paradox, and it still is not resolved. If somebody tells you it's been resolved, they lie. So the story goes like this. Suppose that you have a race between Achilles, who is very, very fast, and tortoise, who is not, obviously. But tortoise starts ahead of Achilles. So Achilles starts here, you see tortoise here. So by the time Achilles makes it here, tortoise makes a little bit of covers some distance. By the time Achilles makes it here, it again makes a little bit of a distance. Because every single time it takes Achilles some time to catch up with where tortoise was, tortoise always makes a little bit more of a distance. So it seems like he can never catch up with it. Now think about it. What is experience telling us? If this happens in real life, this is Achilles, this is tortoise, what do you think? Achilles is running like, I don't know, 15 miles an hour. Tortoise is moving like 0.5 miles an hour. Is Achilles going to be able to catch up? Mathematically, it's not actually the fact. But from what we see with our own eyes, yes, this is what is happening. In mathematics, they actually did find an explanation to this, and this is what is known as calculus. Right? What is calculus telling us? What is the idea in calculus? Anybody do calculus? It's basically based on the infinite divisibility. You kind of go towards infinity. So once you assume that there is no smallest chunk of space, it is infinitely divisible, and then you can calculate these changes. But in order for Achilles actually to catch up with the tortoise, there has to be a smallest chunk of space. There has to be a moment when there's no longer possible to divide. And that's the poor paradox here. So just to make it brief, I guess we're not going to go any further today, but the point here is if somebody tells you this paradox has been resolved, they are lying. It has not been resolved. There's many papers written on it, and nobody was able to successfully resolve this paradox. In physics today, physics has a big problem. Have you ever heard about problem in physics between macrophysics and microphysics? They actually do not work together. Quantum physics on a small scale shows to be working on a different rules than macrophysics. And they are trying to come up with a theory of everything, which is string theory actually is trying to do. But that has not been successful so far. So physics did not resolve this paradox. Nobody resolved it. And according to Zeno, it proves that Parmenides is right. Change is an illusion. Nothing is moving at all. It's all in our head. Anyway, I guess it's enough for today. So I will see you on Monday. There is another reading on Trial of Socrates, which is very cool. I already made it available. Please make sure to read it. We'll discuss it on